Today we have former Hawkeye running back LeShun Daniels back with us as we break down the hiring of Tim Lester. How do we fix this Hawkeye offense and what kind of change do we anticipate to see? The offseason is here. What are workouts like for a Hawkeye? And we will talk a little women's basketball as they prepare for a big one on the road to Maryland. All today, Locked On Hawkeye.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon. He's LeShun Daniels, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts, and you can also watch us on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. LeShun, good to see you again. Got the new gig, but the still same place that you've been doing the podcast here outside of our live appearance in Wrigleyville back before the Iowa Northwestern game. Speaking of that, Iowa was in town women's basketball against Northwestern earlier in the week. Did you make it over to Evanston and watch the ladies in action?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to head up there, but when I was looking at the ticket prices,
Yeah.
yeah, they were astronomically high. And although, yeah, I could afford it, but I wasn't going to pay that type of money for, basketball game on a weekday, even though, Caitlin Clark is worth the price of admission. But yeah, it was crazy. I mean, like there was like the lines just to get into the stadium for,
Mhm.
Northwestern women basketball game was insane. So it really just tells you the kind of effect that Caitlin Clark and the Iowa women's basketball team has on the sport.
It's incredible. We'll talk a little bit more about that, get the scene set for the weekend in hoops, but a lot of football talk here, and we open things up. So, our first time conversing since it became official, Tim Lester is the new offensive coordinator for Iowa. A lot of different directions to go with this one. On the surface, and one thing that I've talked about quite a bit this week, LeShun, is I called it an uninspiring hire, and it's not to say that it's a bad hire or that he's going to be bad or anything like that. It just was not the splash that maybe I hoped for. And again, the likelihood of Kirk Ferentz going out there and hiring a young guy like Tommy Reese or the UNLV offensive coordinator that we talked about, it's not likely. And that's what sometimes you got to remind yourself. We got to live in reality, something like that. But when your final two at a program like Iowa are two guys that are out of work, Tim Lester had an offensive coordinator job set up at Troy. Kevin Johns still doesn't have a job that we know about at this point in time. And because of that, I just, I wonder, I wanted Iowa to, I don't know, try for more. And maybe they did, and they just didn't get the pushback or the fit wasn't there. But that was kind of the thing that maybe has bothered me most. It's not about Tim Lester, him on alone. It's just, I thought that there would be maybe more traction, more people interested in the Iowa offensive coordinator job.
You know, uh, that's a very interesting take, and I definitely agree. Like, yeah, I think it presents the IOC job presented a unique opportunity for an exciting coach to come in here and really, transform what the Iowa offense looks is looked at. Because I mean, especially the way you've seen it over the past few years, it has been good. Like this has been an excellent opportunity because heck, I mean, if you're even marginally better, right, it's gonna make it seem like you're an absolute rock star opportunity wise. But I think something that probably played a part in both the candidates they attracted and the candidates that they essentially went after. I think Coach Ferentz and the Iowa staff, just based on how they're built, you look at the staff right now, a lot of the staff has been with Coach Ferentz in some way, shape, or fashion for a very, very long time. And I think when it came to looking for an offensive coordinator spot, and I think they're looking for someone who's going to be able to provide stability for, I think, an extended period of time, not a person who's going to come in here, essentially transform the offense, and then, maybe after 3 years of good, offensive play, then go ahead and take a job. I think they're really looking for
Mhm.
someone who's had the stability in the past, and then was planning on keeping that stability at the University of Iowa for quite some time. And I think when you look at some of those more exciting candidates, like you mentioned, like a guy like Tommy Reese, like he's got, I'm sure he's got lots of aspiration. The fact that he's gone from Notre Dame to Bama, right? That he's been multiple places in a short period of time. I think something like that wasn't something that Coach Ferentz and the staff, I think, were looking for when it comes to offensive coordinator. Although it would have been super exciting for us, I think he really trying to find some potential long-term stability, and I think that's really what attracted them to Tim Lester and bringing him on.
One of the names that was thrown out right away after the firing of Brian back in October was Ryan Grubb. His connections to the state of Iowa was doing great jobs and eventually helping lead Washington to the national championship game. I do know that conversations were had, that there was a contact there, but the way that I understand it, and I don't know exactly the validity to this, is at minimum, there had to be kind of a wink and a nod. Hey, if you get this thing turned around, you're going to be almost the acting head coach. And knowing Kirk Ferentz, for an outsider to get that kind of role, it just didn't seem like. You understand Ryan Grubb. I mean, this is a guy that continues to ascend. Heck, he might be on his way back to Seattle right now and become the Seahawks offensive coordinator. So, this is a guy that continues to build his resume. And if he's going to make this kind of leap and take on the kind of endeavor that it is to fix the Iowa offense, you knew that was going to be something there. And culture fit. My buddy Biz yesterday, he was on the pod with me, and one thing he talked about is this Iowa football culture. You can speak to it as well as anybody. Finding that right fit, everybody says that. It doesn't matter what you're hiring for, what kind of position it is, whatever you're doing. Everybody always says you got to have the right fit. It's got to fit our culture. It feels like, at least for me as an outsider, culture fit, those kind of things is more important to Iowa football than almost any other endeavor out there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, um, when you look at all the staff at Iowa, I mean, even back when I was playing, you look at them now, like everyone on the staff kind of has the same mentality, so to speak, where hey, like since we've been underdogs our entire life, we're going to take the players who fit the things that we love to do, and that's being tough, being smart, being physical football players, and then helping develop these guys into essentially, really, really good college football players and great young men. And think that's like probably the biggest thing when you look at the coaches on the staff. Those have been their goals as a unit ever since I've been there, since before I've been there, and as it's been currently. I mean, uh, all the guys you look at when people talk about the Iowa roster, they're like, man, these guys play smart, they play tough, they play physical every single week that they're out there, and then these guys get to the NFL and people happen to say the same things, right? Like those are things that have been ingrained into the Iowa football players, and that obviously starts from up top with Coach Ferentz through the rest of it, through the rest of the assistant coaches, all the way down to the players. And that's the biggest thing I think when it comes to looking at the culture of the Iowa football building. Like those are the things that they're really looking for. And who knows? Maybe some of the other candidates that they talked with, maybe it just didn't quite fit, maybe didn't work that way, or hey, maybe they just were interested in some other things. But culture fit, I feel like it's something that's going to be was a pretty big deal when it came to Coach Ferentz looking for additional coaches to bring in. It's going to be the same deal with bringing in a receiver coach as well. Like how are these guys going to fit in the culture here that we have at Iowa? Because you're not going to get as well as great as recruits as we can get. We're not going to get 5-star recruits in and out on a weekend basis, like Alabama, like Ohio State. It doesn't happen. But these guys, they believe in the guys they do bring in, and they're going ahead and they're going to develop these guys into really, really good football players from just kind of just the bare bones that they got with them. So when it comes to having that culture fit, I think that developmental piece and making sure that they can bring that smart, tough, physical Iowa football play to the players that they're dealing with, I think is a pretty big deal when it comes to the culture within the Iowa football building.
Well, they did get a 5-star. Caden Proctor out of the transfer portal, comes back home. And now there's some violations to go along with it. We'll talk about that. And how do we get this offense fixed? What is Tim Lester going to do? Does the RPO scheme work with what Kirk Ferentz wants to do? We'll talk about that as we continue Locked On Hawkeyes. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday, of course, watching the game, getting that right spot on the couch. If you got a bunch of people around, you're going to a party, find a good spot and get your best football snacks. For me, that's wings every single time. A little buffalo, maybe a little Parmesan on there. Oh, so good. Now, Super Bowl Sunday is not just about the game, the food, the commercials. It's also about Super Bowl bets. And for me, starting from the beginning of the game, of course, heads or tails on the coin flip. Yeah, you got to jump on that one right away. But so many props that are available at FanDuel. Lay out the game. How is it going to play out? That's how you build your prop menu. And FanDuel has as many props as anybody you're going to find. So many different ways for you to end the season with FanDuel with the W or two or even three and a whole lot more. Not only can you bet on who's going to win Super Bowl 58 with the Chiefs and the 49ers, FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, scoring multiple touchdowns in a game, how many points will be scored, yardage totals, and on and on. There is so much more at FanDuel. New customers join today. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. Again, that's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Trent LeShun back with you again on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Network. LeShun, let's jump into what this is going to look like in implementing a new offense. Now, when you arrived on campus at Iowa, it was going into year number 2 of Greg Davis. The first season as you were a high school senior was a disaster. It was trying to marry the zone blocking scheme with his horizontal passing game. It was brutal. Told the story before. I looked over at my buddy at halftime at Soldier Field, Northern Illinois game, and I said, I hate the Greg Davis offense. And it was awful in that first year. Now, you guys improved and made a lot of improvements, and I think it was more kind of a mirroring of the two different styles and schemes. But after that first year, Kirk said something to the lines of, I think Greg's understanding now how to be an Iowa coach. I do wonder with this now in this transition, you have to anticipate it's certainly going to be more smooth than what we saw back then.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Coach Ferentz has been through, I guess, now multiple offensive coordinators trying to, um, you know, do their system. So this is really like going to be like this second, really like main switch of offensive system that you're going to be bringing here. Because you have, Coach Davis back in 2012, and yeah, had a lot of rough patches for sure. Especially with the things that Coach Davis was doing prior to his time at Iowa. You look at some of his offenses, is very vastly different than what Iowa has traditionally done. The thing with Tim Lester, one big deal that he's has been doing through his time as an offensive coach has been the fact that it's been a lot of zone blocking. It's been a lot of running the ball in general. So that's going to be, I feel like, a much easy marriage for the Iowa football offense. But obviously adding in some new wrinkles. So when you have the post snap RPOs, I think that's been like really one of his big things. When you look at all the offenses that he's helped coach, and especially at Western Michigan. The RPO system was something that was very, very big with him. And it'll be very interesting, I think, to see I will implement that, because we had RPOs with the Greg Davis offense, but it wasn't like a post snap RPO where it's like you're essentially running an option play. It was more of like a pre snap RPO where it was, hey, depending on, like, we have like an inside zone called one way, and we have maybe like twins to the field side. So you got two receivers, and we'll have like, maybe we'll have like a bubble call to that side, and if they're playing way off, or if they bring a blitz that we can't pick up, hey, see, you can kind of tell with the pre-snap look. CJ snap the ball, toss it out there. This is going to be a little bit different when the fact where it's going to be like, if they go ahead and go with this route with Tim Lester and things that he's done, where it's like, hey, you snap the ball and now you're reading it as you're going through it. So now you have to, there's some different things you kind of have to coach. You have to watch for a legal man downfield, so our offensive line can't get too far upfield, and then you obviously have to be able to read read it out as a quarterback. Like, okay, this is the person I'm keying on, depending upon what he does, will be if I give it or pull it and run it, or pull it and throw it out there. So I think it'll be super interesting watch, but I feel like this is going to be overall as a whole is going to be a little bit more similar to kind of what Iowa has done in the past, just adding, maybe, one or two more steps to bring it more into the year 2024.
We've seen so many teams that implement the RPO based system. And one thing that I've talked about a lot this week, I think some people misconstrue when they hear an RPO and they think of a running quarterback and they think of, you got to be a Lamar Jackson to do those kind of things. I go back to 2019 and what Minnesota did with Tanner Morgan at the quarterback, not a runner by any means, but it was an RPO based system and it was great running backs. Iowa definitely, we feel like, has that, the stable of running backs that they have. And then very simple looks. I mean, how many slant routes did Atman Bell have that year? And Rashawn Bateman, it just felt like they get 8 yards anytime they wanted on one of those slant routes if they got the right key in that read there. And with Cade McNamara at the quarterback position, if he's back healthy, it feels like something that would go very well with his strengths. I mean, just what a cerebral player that he is, the accuracy in those short and intermediate throws, I think is something very good. And that's where my excitement level goes is I think this is something that works. The big question though, LeShun, you were inside the building. Is Kirk willing to give the autonomy needed to make that kind of change? It's not immense. We're not talking about going the spread here and chucking around 60 times a game, but it is a change. Can you see Kirk at 68 years old saying, yes, we need to make these, not wholesale changes, but we need to make certainly more than just a tweak?
You know, it'd be interesting. Like if you asked me this, coming out of Iowa back in 2017, I'd been like, absolutely no shot, no chance, no chance. But the years 2024, the way that the offenses are, I mean, even just from 7, 8 years ago, it's tremendously different, and the way defenses play, it's a lot different nowadays than it was back then. And I think you kind of have to give up a little bit of your control on that offense if you want it to be able to grow it and really take the next step. And thing with that is you're gonna have to get in the gun a little bit more and not just get in the gun to throw the ball, right? Like, you have to be able to get in the gun. You have to be able to run the ball consistently out of the gun, and that's something that Iowa hasn't done a ton of over the since I've been involved with the program. It just hasn't been something that we've done. It's been a lot of under center runs when we do run the football, or if we're in the gun running the football, it's a lot of times it's some type of draw play, or it's just some wide type of sweep. So it'll be interesting to see how much freedom that Coach Ferentz gives Tim Lester to be able to do his thing, because see, he's an offensive coordinator. He's ran systems before, and although they're not going to stray very far away from the traditional Iowa offense, right? Like, as you mentioned, it's not going to be an air raid offense. You're not full spread going four wide every single play like that. Like, that's not going to happen. But there are things that they can do. Maybe out of a 12 personnel or even a 21 personnel out of the gun, right? And being able to improve the run game there to then help you open up those RPO opportunities and open up those quick game opportunities when you have them. Because hey, as we've seen it in the past, it hasn't been something that we've been very good at with when it comes to the quick game on early down and distance, or being able to put ourselves in a position on third downs where we're in third and medium versus third and long, because we get stuffed twice on two run plays, and now we're in a tough spot. So I think it'll be interesting to see how Coach Ferentz allows Tim Lester to really kind of do his thing, and I'm hoping that he does do it. Hoping that he gives him an opportunity, like, hey, this is the things that we can do, and we can do it well. Because as you mentioned, right, like you said the quote about how Coach Ferentz says how Coach Davis learned how to be a coach at Iowa. Who knows? Maybe if this gets off to a better start, maybe it ends up being something where he kind of lets him do his thing a little bit more, versus him just having his entire constraint on offense. So
And it's Kirk is willing to adapt. We've seen that plenty of times. There has been adaptation, and he gets for some segment of the fan base this just curmudgeon that's never going to change anything. But we've seen that, and we've had historical evidence that he absolutely will. You brought up one thing that's really interesting. You talked about 21 personnel. I would love to see that. We know the depth at the running back spot. All right, you got three guys that all certainly showed high levels of play over the last year at the three guys, two true freshmen that played this season with Washington and Bolton. You bring in Brevin, you bring in Xavier Williams, you bring in both those guys. So you got 7 running backs here, and all of them want playing time. All of them, I think, are confident that in their ability to be a Big Ten running back. You go with that 21 personnel, even 22 personnel. I think there's something there. I'm hopeful that Tim Lester kind of sold what you can do while coming into the 21st century offensively and what we see in college football. I think there's something there. What would be the difficult nature, though, of going more 21, even 22 personnel? What would make that difficult to do with what Iowa wants to do? Or is that something, well, you're a running back. Of course you want to see that, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd love to see it for sure. You know, doing it out of so what makes it a little bit different doing it out of the gun versus doing that type of thing like under center is just really the location where you put that second running back, whether it's a running
Mhm.
back or a fullback, how you actually use them and um to make it so where they just don't constrain the box and make it so you can't run the football at all.
Mhm.
So you have to be a little bit creative, but you don't have to do anything too drastic. Teams run 21 personnel out of the gun all the time. um
Pistol?
Yep, pistol is usually more common way that they
Yeah.
do it. I mean, especially if you watch NFL, you watch the Ravens, they do that a ton.
Mhm.
Uh they didn't do it a ton this past Sunday, but that's a totally different
That's
conversation for
weird.
another day.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
But but yeah, I mean, like you have to be a little bit creative with it. But with that though, you can get a lot more creative with how you use those guys out of the backfield, especially in the passing game. Now
Mhm.
you can utilize both the running backs, whether you do it in pass protection or you use it with some type of option routes and give them more abilities there. And running backs, just like tight ends, are easy for quarterbacks to get the ball out and get the ball to them. And if you add a little bit more creative ability with that, and having both running backs in the backfield, and I know Coach Brian did that a little bit.
Mhm.
If you go back probably like 2 or 3 years, you watch Iowa Office, they did it a little bit. They haven't done as much recently, but there's just more variety that you can do. And say you bring 21 personnel, but you got a guy who's essentially like a third down running back that you can move to receiver. Because now a lot of times teams will either try to match your personnel offensively, and if they don't match it, now you've got an advantage, in the run game. Uh, and then if they do try to match it, uh, I mean, if they do try to match it, right, you got advantage in the run game, and if they don't match, now you have advantage in the passing game. Where hey, I can move these guys and put one of the running backs in the slot. I can pull them out wide. I can do all these different types of things with that. So I think it's really just how much autonomy that they get that Tim Lester is granted, and if he's granted that autonomy, I think it really does open up a lot of the different things that Iowa can do offensively, especially because again, I'm not the amount of talented guys that we have in that running back room is going to be a big piece of the offense. And I think it's going to help open up more opportunities for the receivers. So,
I think we're talking into ourselves into a little excitement here. We'll see if it happens, obviously, and we get to spring football, we'll know a little bit more. But I think we're getting there. We're going to talk a little bit more about the offseason as we ramp our way up to spring practice. What's it like for a football player inside the walls of Fort Kinnick and getting ready during the cold winter months before spring football? We'll talk about that. Plus a little hoops talk as we continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Trent Condon, LeShun Daniels with you. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Off season, LeShun, I mean, it was bad, right? I mean, you getting up cold, 5 a.m., 4 a.m. I don't know how early you guys had to get up. It just sounds brutal.
yeah, it's not a fun time, especially like for your freshman, like your freshman year, you're always in
Yeah.
that 6 a.m. group, and that's just it's not a good time, not a good time. So I learned my lesson after my first year, and I made sure that I was in either I think it was 7:30 or the 9 a.m. groups because that early was not for me, not at all. Because and then especially like when you're a freshman, so I didn't have a car or a moped, and
Oh.
so like I'm getting up 5 a.m. I'm making the trek, through usually we would walk through the hospital if
Hmm.
um because usually it would be unlocked and you can cut through. But if you couldn't get in through there, then you had to walk all the way around because obviously like the buses aren't running, and so it
Yeah.
wasn't a fun time. Was not a good time at all. And then you get there, and now your workouts. So like at least like for the first 2 weeks, it's really the worst because you get there, you do like a quick speed session. Then you go in the weight room and you're lifting and you're doing heavy cleans, you're doing heavy squat, heavy bench. It's just not a fun time. And then after that, you go into the conditioning part of it, and now you're doing prowler pushes, you're doing tire flips. The cliche, right?
Yeah.
Football stuff, but you're like gas doing it. So because again, you've been off for a couple of weeks, and now you're trying to get back into that mode. So it's not a great time, but we know it's all good fun. We know it's all part of the process. So you try to make the most of it.
It's a lot of work and going through that and getting yourself right and doing those things. And oh, by the way, then after you do that, you got to go to class. You got homework. You are still a student. Sometimes we forget about that part of it, that you still are going through all that on top of it and everything that goes along with it. Tough time, but eventually, I mean, that's kind of makes what Iowa football is what it is, right? And the work that you guys do in the offseason to get to that point. Hey, before we let you go, LeShun, obviously we talk a ton of football with you, but I know you've been watching the women's basketball team, men's team. Boy, let another one slip away earlier this week against Indiana. And there's been just too many of those. It looks like it's certainly a rebuilding year for the men's team. And they get ready for a matchup tonight against Ohio State. Got to get it. It's sad, seeing Carver for a men's game with. Talked to my buddy yesterday that was at the Maryland game. The announced attendance was, I think 8,500. I said, what, 6,000 in there? He said, not only that, not even that. It's absolutely crazy. And France had a lot of success. It feels like this fan base is out. Haven't got that run to the second weekend, and people aren't showing up. They're showing up for wrestling and women's basketball, but not the men.
Yeah. I mean, it's super frustrating. Um, it's just super frustrating because again, like they've had the men's team has had some really good opportunities with
Hmm.
superstar players that are playing professionally over the past what 4 5 years now.
Yeah.
Like they've had some really really good players, and the fact that you haven't been able to make that jump right to the second round, and has been, I think, frustrating for the fan base. It doesn't help that the times that the games are during the week. Right, I heard that from I think Rand might have said that
Hmm.
yesterday or a couple days ago. I understand that for sure, but if the men's team were as good as the women's team,
Yeah.
in terms of their conference, right? People would show up. People would show up,
Yeah.
and um, I think that's really the deal, man. And it's super frustrating for the players. I'm sure it's frustrating for the coaches. You wish that things were different, but hey, the only way that you're going to be able to make that difference is if you step it up with the play on the court. So it's frustrating for them, but hey, if you want people, if you want the people to show up, hey, you got to win, and you got to win often. So I think that's really the deal there. I mean, hey, you look at the Iowa football. I know Iowa's basically a football school now, but hey,
Hmm.
when we win a lot, right? People show up.
Yep.
I think
Yep.
the Iowans show up, and if the men's team were better, people would come to the
Women, everybody's showing up there. Well, you save money not going to the Northwestern game. You saving up to go back home to Ohio. The women make a run to the Final Four and go to Cleveland. I
games.
think I've told you my sister lives in Cleveland now. So,
Really?
and her husband, yeah, he's an Ohio State grad, so I got to deal with that all the time. But that aside, we've already made plans. If it happens, we're gonna go back out there. I was there with my daughter a year ago down in Dallas. You have a chance to go back home then if that happens. Start saving up that money because I'll tell you the ticket prices. Whew, they're going to be pricey.
Believe me, I'll be. Yeah, I would think I would definitely make the trip. Up there. I mean, if they're in there, like the way that and especially the way that they've been playing this year, especially the way that Caitlin's leading the team, and some of the other players are stepping up. Hey, they've got a really good opportunity. So yeah, they've been super fun to watch the entire season. And yeah, hopefully they can go ahead and make that deep tournament run. That'll be an exciting time.
They get Maryland coming up. That'll be on Big Fox, which is just absolutely crazy in its own right. We've seen that already this season with the Indiana game at Maryland. Brenda Freeze, an Iowa native, coaching, had a lot of success in Maryland. They're not quite as good as they've been some past years, but always a very physical team. They'll have certainly a different defensive game plan. They have some really good athletes that can try to slow down and double Caitlin and do those kind of things. But we're seeing something we likely will never see again, LeShun, in the rest of our life with this women's team and just the star power of Caitlin Clark. Hey, good stuff as always. Good catching up with you again. We'll get together again next week and we'll get some Super Bowl picks. How about that?
Ooh, let's do it. I'm excited for it.
We'll continue breaking down what we like to see. Also, I think we talked ourselves into some positives with the hire of Tim Lester and what this could be and could look like. Of course, next week we will hear from Tim Lester in the press conference. For LeShun Daniels, Trent Condon with you. LeShun, we'll talk to you again next week.
Yes, sir. Sounds like a plan. Go Hawks.